at the end of 2023, the beginning of 2024, we saw the long-awaited release of the Disney Plus series Percy Jackson and the Olympians. And when I say long-awaited, I really do mean it. Like, what? The book series first debuted in the mid-2000s, got really popular, got a film franchise which people were very hyped up for, which in turn ended up being very bad and crashing and burning, but not before raising the profile of the franchise overall, making the fan base grow even bigger, whilst at the same time, Rick kept releasing more and more books. But of course, people remained a bit unsatisfied for years. They wanted the franchise to get another crack at the big time, especially after Fox was acquired by Disney, giving them the rights to the story. And so in 2020, 7 years after the second film, Sea of Monsters, crashed and burned, we finally got the news that a new adaptation for Disney Plus was in the works, with it being officially greenlit in 2022. Feels like they greenlit it way before that, but I guess this was more of a formality sort of thing. But yeah, it got that green light, and we got the release of Season 1. And for the most part, it did very well for itself. In terms of its reception, it was a massive hit with critics, with a score of 92% on Rotten Tomatoes. And then on top of that, audiences seemed to enjoy it as well. 80% score off of 2,500 reviews. Not too shabby at all. And on top of that, it did pretty good numbers in terms of viewership. Each episode got at least 10 million views in its first week, and the show finished its run in late January, early February, as the most watched original program on all streaming services for those weeks. Not too bad at all. Numbers that Disney would likely be very happy with, especially for a new franchise, and so clearly there is room to grow it. After all, Season 1 is usually the lowest viewership that a hit show can expect. And so I think they want to keep these numbers rising, and I'm hopeful for that too. After all, I have noticed that with Disney Plus, Season 2 is often the chopping block season, so you don't want to stuff it up there, but honestly, I don't think we're ever going to be looking at this getting cancelled. The first season was well received, so I don't really see a reason for any viewership to decrease at all. So this video, it's not a doomer video by any means. I'm not saying, oh, the show was terrible and here's how it needs to go to avoid getting cancelled, I'm so smart, blah 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 blah. No, that's not happening. Like, we're at the point that this show has been managing to get equal viewership to some of the less popular Star Wars shows. And like, maybe that sounds like a bad thing, but think about how massively popular Star Wars is. The fact that you can even make this point of comparison is damn good for this franchise. And so, in that regard, I think there's no worries. However, I do think there's still room for change. Changes that would improve the overall quality of the show. Just push it further up the food chain, make it more likely to build up hype, build up momentum, and hell, in all honesty, it's probably just me talking a whole load of BS, but at the very least, I think this would make it more enjoyable and suiting to my personal tastes. And so yeah, in no real particular order, it's time for us to jump into things. Okay, so one of the more crucial elements of the show that I want to see changed up a tad is probably the pacing overall. And yeah, that's a pretty vague statement, I know, but I don't know. I did feel at times that in Percy Jackson Season 1, there was a lot of emphasis placed in some areas, and then almost none in others. Like, those early episodes, to me, were very fun. They spent a lot of time building characters, building relationships with one another. They spent a lot of time fleshing out the world overall, spending a lot of time traveling. And then towards the end, I don't know, it's like they started racing to the finish, zooming through a bunch of really key events very, very quickly. Now, part of that's obviously due to the budget. The more episodes you're making, the more money you're spending. Like another 10 to 15 million per episode, I think it was. And I mean, that's nothing really to sneeze at. So obviously, I'm not expecting them to ramp up the episode number. I'm not expecting them to make more episodes unless the show gets way more popular than it already is, to the point that they can justify spending more money, getting more time. But in the absence of that extra time and that extra money, I think the show really does need to start to economize. It needs to use the time it has more wisely. Not that it did a bad job at that in Season 1, but I do think when it comes to the finale, comes down to crunch time, you want as much time as you can to really showcase the culmination of your story threads. You want time to have those big moments, those big twists sink in. But in this first season, I felt like they spent so much time on that setup, only to remember in the last 3 episodes, oops, oh shit, we still have so much to cover. And so they ended up turbo boosting their way to the finale. They didn't give the scenes enough time to breathe, enough time for the plot points to settle and sink in. It was just bam, 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 bam. Now this happens, then this happens, then this happens, and this, and this, and this, and this, and this. And whilst I did end up really enjoying the season and the show, I felt like the final episodes could have been better. Because exposition's all well and good, but that's there to introduce you to the world itself, to get you invested in the characters. And those early episodes did just that. They got you to firmly understand the world, the dynamics of the demigods and the gods. They got you invested in Grover and Percy and Annabeth for you to root for them, to enjoy their friendship, ship Percabeth, get invested in their journey and the mortal perils they're facing, but like I said, all of this needs to be in service to the story. But it felt like the overall story was almost an afterthought at times. And the real focus of the show was just on that character development and that exposition. In essence, it felt very, very front-loaded. Season 2, though, it really should need a whole lot less exposition overall. We know most of the characters. We've seen their initial journeys. And so now, it should be time for us to have more story development in terms of the focus. And the finale of this particular book, once again, it is very important for the overarching narrative. There's a big confrontation. So hopefully it doesn't get breezed through. Another thing I really hope they include is, how do I phrase it? More modern American references. Specifically how the gods are interacting with America and how they've been molded and shaped by it. I felt like the gods adopting a lot of the trappings of the modern world was funny, genuinely funny. And we did see it a little bit, like Ares in his motorcycle, for instance, but I don't know. I feel like they strayed away from that vibe so much. It was a shame too, because in the book it definitely made the gods feel like people. Like, of course they would adopt cool shit. Why wouldn't they? They're gods, they want the best of the best. But also, a lot of it was just fun, straight up fun. Stuff like Hephaestus TV. He has a dedicated channel that is specifically used for laying traps for Ares and Aphrodite, to catch them cheating and then embarrass them in front of all Olympus. There wasn't even a hint of that. There was his trap, but it was a lot less funny than it was in the book. Hephaestus himself, he felt like a nothing character without that. Just kind of sad and pathetic. They strip away those cool things. How about Charon? Instead of the gloomy, demonic dude that we see in the show who's pretty basic and boring, in the book he's classic middle management. He's complaining about his job, his station in life, he asks for pay rises, he complains to the kids, and he spends way too much money on trying to look dapper in premium Italian suits. That's the kind of stuff that brings the world to life, that makes it make sense, makes it funny, makes it charming. And by removing it, trimming it, changing it, you're not making things more cool, more badass, more authentic. You're killing off the authentic vibe for Percy Jackson. It removes something that was intrinsic to the books, to the world. And so you end up with a far more bland and generic fantasy world. So I'd like them to reverse that and start to introduce those elements far more heavily when they turn up. Another element that, honestly, I think they could use more of, although that being said it would gobble up some time, so I'm a little bit unsure, is more of a focus on the gods. For me, one of the coolest scenes in the entire show was when Poseidon zoomed into Olympus to save Percy from Zeus, and he and his brother had that big discussion about Kronos and spoke to each other in ancient Greek. Like, you can't watch that scene where Percy just feels like such a non-factor, a non-entity there, and tell me you don't want more of that shit. For me, I felt like the Greek god interpersonal dynamics, they're so interesting. And whilst I think it builds a bit of mystique and aura to have them remain more mysterious at times, I do think it would serve the show well in the long run to include more sequences where you take a quick step back from the main story, the main heroes, and you see some of this side stuff, just to build the tension. Not too much, but just enough to further develop those storylines that would usually progress off screen, and just to get a godly perspective on things. Because otherwise, you have a bunch of characters that you're simply told matter, and are told are important, without ever really seeing them that much. And so I think it would add a new dimension to the show to see all that play out on screen. Just enhances the drama, enhances the story. Especially with this far more nuanced take on the gods that they've been going with. Which in turn ties into my next point as to how they can continue to enhance the show. And this isn't really a change to anything they've done in season 1, but more a plea to keep things going the way they're going. Don't backtrack, don't second guess. And that's the idea, to keep playing with this shades of grey concept. The idea that the gods are not universally good characters, that Poseidon, despite Percy being enamored with him currently, is a classic deadbeat. Zeus is a cruel bastard, willing to murder his nephew for the crime of being born, willing to murder his niece and nephew as well. Hades, he is very much cut from the same cloth. In the show, Athena abandons her daughter to die for the simple crime of making fun of her. Ares sides with Kronos at first, and then also openly scorns his kids and says he doesn't like them. Hermes allows Percy to keep roaming the Lotus Casino for just long enough for the time limit to expire on the quest. Like, do I need to keep going on? It's pretty clear that the gods mostly suck. Perhaps even more than they do in the book, or at least it's made more overt. And despite being the faction that the heroes do end up siding with, it doesn't make them the good guys, or even right. Merely the protagonists. The devil that you know, rather than Kronos, who's the devil you don't know. And at the same time, they also place nuance onto Luke's character. He doesn't want to hurt Percy. He wants him to join him, to help him, because he does care. Rather than in the book, where he just flips a switch and suddenly he's a full-on murderous psycho, which, it's not very compelling. And so, by having the protagonist faction kind of led by assholes and abusers, and the public face of the antagonist faction, Luke, being a victim of it all, I think it presents a more comprehensive moral quandary. And as a result, it makes the drama more compelling, the story more interesting, and Percy's journey, how he interacts with them all, his arc, how he changes and shifts and grows alongside everything, it gets more exciting, it gets more interesting and engaging. And in the end, I think it's going to end up making season 2 all the better for it. And so, yeah, not really much else to say other than that. Season 1 was great, don't get me wrong. But I don't know, I think season 2 could be even better, as long as they stay the course on some of what I said and also just change up a couple things. But of course, these have all just been my opinions, and now I'd like to hear yours. What did you think of my ideas? Are you with me? Maybe not? I'm curious for your thoughts, so make sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and let me know.